In this webinar, I'm going to use React to set up my environment and to set up my workspace. So I quickly grabbed the React starter from Bit. Bit comes with a lot of predefined baked-in starter packs that can either bring different components or different examples for you to start with. This is the most bare bones starter we have for React. And I'm just going to target the default scope for this project to be something that demo. As you see, the default scope will target my account on a scope maintenance start demo. This means that as we export our components, they will all be available in a specific location. The bit new command is the command we use for running starter. The name of this starter is React, and this comes from the tbit React environment aspect. And I call this workspace my workspace. Behind the scenes, what happens now in this area is Bit creates a hidden directory deep in my file structure, temporary one, to have the starter and run from it. And now as we run the starter itself, Bit makes sure to install dependencies, set up everything I need for my Bit and React development. Let's give it a few more seconds. But while we are here, as we call the scope getting started demo, something that I also want to do is go to Bit Cloud. And here, I will go ahead and create a new scope under my personal account, call it getting started demo, without a dot. That is public, and just hit create, let it run, and back to our terminal. We're still installing a few components. Okay, installation process is done. Great. Now we've created our workspace. I'm going to cd into it, and let's open VS Code. We have an IDE to get started. Now, let's zoom in a little bit. The Bit workspace is, first of all, you can start a new repository for a workspace or using Bit new to create a new repository. So behind the scenes, Bit, as you see here, right, the Git ignore, Git attributes and other files, Bit also creates a Git repository behind the scenes. So you can create a repository, commit and push all your changes there. There are two main configuration files that take place when working with Bit. First of all is workspace.json. This defines all of your development environment system, right? So how the default directory structure for this workspace when creating components, what's my default scope, some default dependencies, my generator, which we'll touch a bit later, and a bitmap file. The bitmap file is a unique file, something that is maintained by Bit. This file maps specific directories in your workspace to be Bit components. This means that you have the flexibility of having very nested structure or very shallow structure or any mix of directory structure you want in your workspace. In addition to these two files, you also Bit generated my prettier configuration, ESLint, TypeScript config, and everything I need to start my development. And it also created a small component called environment. We'll touch this later. Now, as we get started, the first thing we'd like to do is create components. So similar to having starters for generating component and new workspaces, you also have the templates command and components that are just templates for creating components. So if you saw earlier on workspace.json, I already have a generator register, and this generator is here defined locally, created inside this workspace. So all of the templates are coming from the list of generators. So if you have other types of components you want to start creating with templates, you can bring external generators as templates, sort as dependencies, and use them. So we'll use Bit create React, and let's call it my first component. You can add namespacing. So if you need things to be nested in directories or nested in the logical component name, so I can do UI/ or I can do whatever I want, and it's types of nesting. But here, I'm just going to leave it as is. React, the name of the template, obviously, and the generator and the component here. A few things before we dive into the component, right? We see here that Bit prints several lines of information on our new component. First of all, the component location relative to my workspace. So getting started demo, my first component. And as you see, a component is a directory, a self-contained directory. Also mentioned an environment. Environment is a type of component that contains all of the configuration required to build and operate on components. We'll touch this a little bit later on this video. And lastly, the package name. So each component by default is available as a package in the workspace as an external module for other components or other apps to depend on. So the package, or essentially for each component, what you see is that Bit creates a symlink with all of the compiled outputs of the component in our modules. So if you import a component, or if you want to create dependencies between components, what you will do is you will import the package name and not the component name. All right. So because we have a new component here, and this component may have different dependencies, like it may depend on React or any other thing, let's just quickly run Bit install to bring all of our dependencies while we walk you through what is a component. So the basic template for Bit for a new component contains the following, and this is true for any of our templates. So first of all, an index file that rolls up all of your APIs. So everything you want to export, it's in an ideal place. You would want to have your index file to export them. So any consumer will import the raw directory and get everything from index. This allows you to be more specific in the type of APIs that you want to provide. Another file, and this can be a set of files, is the actual implementation file. So in this case, my first component ESX, very basic component. You can have as many files as you want, and you can also create subdirectories for other files that you need if you have very complex and large component. Another file that we probably all know is a spec file. In this case, this is using Jest and testing in React, and another file called composition file, essentially allowing you to render component in its own standalone environment. Right. Now, once we have a component available in our workspace, we can run Bit start. Bit start is a local workbench for components. It allows you to see different features on components in the local dev server. All of this information is also available, and all of these features are also available through CLI terminal commands. But it's much more easy to build, in this case, a UI component for dev server. But for some developers that are building SDKs or other functionalities that sometimes the UI is not always necessary, they don't have to. Right. As you see here, we have a small dev server running first component. And as you see, we never wrote any documentation, but the component already comes with some automated documentation features. So all of the properties supportable by the table, the composition gallery is rendered. You can see the packaging of the component, and there are a few more unique features. So the preview feature shows you all the composition, dependencies. If you have a dependency graph between components, Bit tracks them and creates them here automatically, and an automated API reference generated on the fly from the component type schema. So all of your export functions or export types are available to view. You can even see the implementation or the code behind the component, browse the dependencies that Bit found for this component, like testing lib, which React version it uses, and so on. There's other features that they are, like a comparison, but in this case, it will simply on new components, so I don't have any past versions to compare with. Another few features that we have is obviously a HTML. So once I change something in the component and save, Bit renders it. Now, when we created this component, and we also see this here, this component has a specific environment. That's all. An environment is a unique type of component that controls all of your configuration. Now let's go over the implementation of environment in Bit. Because it's a type of component, it's also managed version and so on by Bit. Here, again, an index file that shows all my export, but the most interesting file in an environment is the Bit and TS file. Essentially, this defines programmatically how you're managing your components. So it's a composition of multiple plugins, like a TypeScript plugin, a Jest plugin, Retail plugin, so on. And all of them, importing very independent configuration for them, and all of them are used to run with different lifetime hooks of the environment. So we have the compiler function, which would just set the types of compiler to pass to that compiler function, and the types of compiler will just read from your tsconfig, and all of your configuration files are just the normal configuration files for the different tools you already know are here just for you to observe. You can write your own configuration. As you see, our approach here is to extend some default configuration. You can even jump to definition to see exactly what is set by default. You can override. So I can go ahead and say, and set my compiler options and set my own, or on extreme cases, you can just go ahead and delete all of the defaults coming from Bit if you truly know what you want to achieve. By the way, for Bit, we try to default to ESM, try to keep everything as modern as possible. But if you have different requirements from your builds, from your tools, then go ahead, you are more than welcome to do it. We have the same experience for how to control component compilation, component testing, component linting, formatting. And the interesting piece here, and that I want to suffer, is preview. Preview is a unique feature of the environment that controls how to render a component and how to bundle a component. Essentially, it just has a mounter file inside the preview that has a mounter function. And that mounter function, you have full control on. So if you want to wrap the component in any context, in any parameters, have anything in and around that mounter to control your rendering, you can go ahead and do that for this file. And in case you have multiple environments, for example, for multiple types of configuration, you can control each of them from here. And lastly, one of the final configuration that is available, I mean, there are a few other internal stuff which we not touch at this point, but the build pipeline. So in Bit, we build each component in complete isolation. So each component has its own unique build pipeline set according to the environment. This means that if you have components using in multiple environments in the same workspace, each component, according to the environment, may have a different build pipeline. And all of this without bombarding your IDE with additional configuration files for different types of components. Environments in Bit are scalable and customizable enough for you to have both React and Angular and Vue components in the same workspace, and you just run a single Bit build command. And without having too many configuration files, you can just build all of your types of your components. Lastly, and this is very important to understand, you don't have to have an environment implemented inside each workspace. An environment can come as a dependency. So in this case, while the environment is here locally, so I can run just to show, right? I can run bit list to show all of the components that I have. I see that my environment is here locally, and this is where I get the start from. And if I'm heading to my bitmap file that shows and defines all components, I can see that the environment is right here. So if needed, you can also bring an environment as a dependency. So you will Bit install that environment as a dependency. You can set as generators and use it without having all of the code here. This means that you can standardize your development. Now, all right. So now that we have our first component and environment, something that is always want to do with Bit is, okay, how do I share these components? How do I build these components and get them to be used by other projects? In this case, I'm just going to want to run the bit tag command and we'll give it a message saying my first version and trigger a build. Usually the bit tag command is something that we would recommend running on CI and using different caching capabilities to make it as streamlined as possible, because this is a heavy command that does a fair set of heavy lifting capabilities. For example, as you see here, the isolator piece means that Bit takes each component from this workspace and creates a dedicated, independent, isolated, temporary directory called a capsule for each component. And all of the build pipeline tasks run just there. So it's in complete isolation, making sure that you don't have any dependencies that are not well defined, anything that is not truly working in complete isolation, because if it cannot be built in isolation, then if it's going to be a package installed in a project, there are a lot of cases where this will just take for your consumers. Now, as this run, as you see here, we are on the test pipeline. Oh, I guess that I broke our test. So let me get back to the file that's accidentally broke. And I just know that here, this needs to be a hello world, but let's fix this one. It's much easier to fix our test than fix our code. Okay. Before we move forward to completing the tag, I want to discuss in briefly how we can add dependencies to components. Now, in Bit, we try to be as lightweight and efficient in dependency management. So while in traditional monorepos, you constantly have to manage a per library or a per component package.json if you want to have independent versioning for them. Here in Bit, we try to automate this. So the dependencies for each component, as you see here, there is no package.json for each component. But let's say I want to Bit install Lodash, and I want to use Lodash in my component. And I have one component that uses Lodash and another component that does not use Lodash. How can Bit resolve for that? How can you, without controlling package.json, can control it? Well, the easy question is that Bit runs static code analysis, and it only looks for import statements for this component, right? You see here. Now, if I remove it, save, rerun Git show, and I'll see that it's comes from being a dependency. Dependencies can be contextual, right? I can have a dev dependency or a runtime dependency. So the way to control that is Bit understands. Lodash, Bit understands what is the type of your dev file. And according to this, it builds the dependency graph. So it knows that Lodash is a dev dependency. Version, obviously, gets resolved from your node modules. And if you want to standardize and align on different versions of different dependencies, the way to do that is through the dependency policy in the env.json file as part of your environment, where you can say what you want your React dependency and support of range be, React DOM, JS, GraphQL, whatever you need. Bit does not force these dependencies upon components, but only if your component uses them, you can then standardize and essentially tell for the environment as part of your standardization, you can decide what will be the version for this component. Now, another feature here is ability to say what are our patterns for different dev files. So how I name my test, how I name my docs, and so on. And this allows us to better define actually what we want to build. So let me run again my first version, tag, and this time our test should pass and things will run. While we run this, I do want to show you what are capsules. So this is more of an internal command, but Bit capsules will essentially, we will show all the different capsule location. In this case, I do want to get to the capsule here for the workspace. So let's see the into it. And yes, -a. You see here that I have two directories, one of them for my environment, one of them for my components. So I can cd into my first component. And inside of it, this just looks like what happened if this component was in its own standalone project. So it has a automatically generated package.json that can be generated automatically. It has all the files, and as Bit runs the build process, everything will run here. And eventually, as different tasks complete, we should start seeing that this directory will get generated. All of the build artifacts that we generate will start generating here. The node modules that were installed, everything happens in these capsules, which again is why we recommend running versioning on CI. You can console docs to understand how to do just that. We see here the different tasks that Bit runs, and we have two new components. And to export them, to enable other developers to use them with the export command. But before I do that, I actually need to log in my CLI with my account. So I'll just quickly run bit login, captures my, let's see that successful. Okay. So now I'm just going to run bit export. Now that I'm authenticated, I no longer need to run bit login again. But here I am just running my export. And here in our scope, back on our server. So we see our two new components, my first component and my environment, all the same features that we had before. So the automated documentation as we had it, the bundle set that was now able to calculate, looking at the previews, looking at the generated API graphs, looking at the code, and a few more features. Right now that we have a new version, we can see an entry in the changelog for that new version. And we can even see here, how we can install the component as a package, and a few more features like how can we source this component here in Workspace. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a great, wonderful day. Thank you so much.